At dawn, when most men are still half dreaming and the world feels quiet enough to forgive mistakes, Corporal James Dalton made a choice that should not have worked. History says wars are shaped by generals, plans, and thick manuals stamped with authority. Reality is messier. Reality is mud, fear, and men running out of acceptable options. At 6:47 a.m. on March 12, 1944, Dalton was pressed into a shallow ditch near the Italian town of Cassino. His uniform soaked through, his boots sinking slowly as the earth breathed under his weight. Fog rolled through the Leary Valley like a living thing, clinging to everything it touched. Somewhere ahead, an engine growled low and steady. Not a tank. Faster. Lighter. A German armored scout car was moving down the road toward American lines. Just as it had done dozens of times before, Dalton had no bazooka. No mines, no grenades, nothing the field manual approved. What he did have was a length of rusted barbed wire wrapped tight around a shovel handle. An idea borrowed from a lifetime of watching machines fail in predictable ways. Every officer in his division had forbidden improvised weapons. Battalion command had already warned him twice that unauthorized modifications could land him in a court-martial. On paper, Dalton was about to do something stupid. On the ground, he was about to do something necessary. The scout car moved at roughly 15 miles per hour, slow enough to observe, fast enough to kill. Dalton could hear the metallic clatter of its suspension, the uneven rhythm of tires biting into a damaged road. The commander's hatch was open. The crew would be scanning the fog for muzzle flashes and movement, looking for positions to mark for artillery. That was their real weapon. The gun was just a reminder. Dalton tightened his grip on the wire. His hands trembled, not from fear of death, but from anger that had been building for weeks. 11 men gone in 3 weeks. Not charging a hill. Not storming a bunker. Just being found, marked, and erased by artillery hours later. The approved methods for stopping light armor all required equipment that never seemed to arrive when it mattered. Manuals are written in offices. Men die in valleys. He thought of Gary, Indiana, of smoke-choked skies and the sound of steel being shaped by heat and pressure. His father worked 15-hour shifts in blast furnaces to keep 6 children fed. Jimmy learned early that systems didn't fail because they were evil. They failed because they were incomplete. A missing bolt. A loose connection. A wire where there shouldn't be one, or not where it should. As a boy, he spent more time in rail yards than classrooms, watching switchmen curse and improvise solutions to keep trains moving. By 17, he was one himself, trained to see how a small fix could prevent a catastrophic derailment. He didn't think in terms of rules. He thought in terms of forces, momentum, and weak points. He enlisted in January 1943, 3 months after turning 19. The posters promised training, skills, a chance to matter. What he got was 8 weeks of rushed instruction, a rifle that still felt foreign, and a transport ship headed for North Africa. By the time he reached Italy later that year, illusions had been burned away by artillery and rain. The 34th Infantry Division fought its way north through Italy, one village at a time. The fighting was slow, grinding, and unforgiving. But assaults weren't what broke men. Reconnaissance did. German scout cars appeared at dawn and dusk, slipping forward just enough to see, just enough to mark positions. Then they vanished. Hours later, shells arrived with terrifying accuracy. The SDK FZ-222 was built for exactly this job. Fast, lightly armored, armed with a 20mm cannon and a machine gun. It could absorb rifle fire and return something far worse. Men fired anyway because doing nothing felt worse than dying. Bullets sparked off armor. Machine guns answered. Eddie Kowalski was killed on February 18th, standing his ground too long, believing volume of fire might matter. Sergeant Mike Brennan died 5 days later trying to time a grenade throw. Corporal Luis Vargas was cut down on March 4th while sprinting for cover as the scout car withdrew. By early March, 47 men were dead because of reconnaissance vehicles alone. After another attack killed 2 more soldiers on March 10th. Dalton stopped waiting for permission. That night, under cover of darkness, he took barbed wire and 2 entrenching tools and went out alone. He didn't tell anyone. If it failed, he would carry that failure himself. He chose a narrow stretch of road between two trees, a natural choke point where vehicles couldn't maneuver easily. He drove the shovels deep into the mud on either side, testing them until they held firm. Then he strung the wire across the road, 14 inches off the ground, exactly axle height. Too low, and it would be crushed. Too high, and it would miss. Too loose, and it would snap. Too tight, and it would break. He adjusted it until it hummed softly when plucked, a vibration that told him the tension was right. He buried it lightly, just enough to hide it without dulling its bite. Then he returned to his foxhole and waited, listening to the valley breathe. At dawn, the scout car came, emerging from the fog like a shape pulled from memory. At 50 yards, the wire caught the front axle. There was no explosion, no flash. Just physics doing what physics always does. The wheel locked instantly. Momentum did the rest. The vehicle flipped violently, rolling 3 times before landing upside down in the road. The engine screamed, trapped in its final effort. Dalton ran forward, heart pounding, rifle raised, and found 2 stunned survivors crawling free. He took them prisoner, cut the wire down, dragged it away before officers arrived. Officially, the scout car had simply overturned on bad terrain. Unofficially, something had changed. That morning, for the first time in weeks, artillery never came. Word spreads differently in war. Not through memos or briefings, but through glances, whispers, and men quietly asking, "How did you do it?" Dalton didn't explain it first. He didn't need to. Others had seen the wreck. They had seen the absence that followed. German patrols slowed. Some dismounted early. Some turned back altogether. Asterisk at night, soldiers went out with wire and tools of their own. They copied the setup carefully, learning through trial and error where it worked best. Roads, paths, narrow gaps between trees or stone walls. Scout cars flipped or crashed. A few managed to stop just in time, crews bailing out in confusion. Each time information failed to reach German artillery units with the same speed and accuracy as before, asterisk casualties dropped. Not dramatically at first, but enough to be noticed by the men living there. Fewer shells. Longer gaps between attacks. A sense that something invisible had shifted in their favor. Officers noticed too. They saw the results without seeing the paperwork to support them. Asterisk, that was the problem. Approving the method meant admitting doctrine had failed. Field manuals listed 16 approved ways to disable light armor. Dalton's wasn't one of them. To acknowledge it officially would have meant explaining why the approved solutions weren't available when men needed them. So reports were rejected. Incidents were described vaguely. Vehicles overturned. Terrain was difficult. Fog was thick. Asterisk Dalton was never praised. He was never punished either. Instead, he was quietly reassigned, moved between units under the pretense of experience sharing. He showed men how to measure axle height, how to judge tension by sound and feel, how to hide wire without weakening it. No notes were taken. No names were recorded. Asterisk German reconnaissance adapted slowly. Patrols became cautious, then hesitant. Vehicles stopped short and sent infantry forward instead. That took time. Time meant fewer surprise artillery strikes. Fewer surprise strikes meant men lived long enough to learn the ground. Survival became routine instead of accidental. Asterisk by summer. Wire obstacles at axle height were common in certain sectors, though no one could say who authorized them. On paper, everything followed the manual. On the ground, the wire stayed. Asterisk. After the war, Dalton went home. He returned to Gary, to rail yards and familiar noise. He married. He raised a family. He worked for 4 decades without incident or ceremony. He never talked about Italy. Not to his children. Not to his coworkers. Not even at reunions where others swapped stories and compared scars. Asterisk years later. Military doctrine quietly adopted wire obstacles for light vehicle denial, credited vaguely to field experience in Italy. No citation. No corporal's name attached. The method survived because it worked, not because it was endorsed. Asterisk, that is how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees or perfect plans, but through exhausted men who refuse to accept pointless death. Punishing Dalton would have been easy. Promoting him would have been inconvenient. Silence was simpler. Asterisk, and so the system didn't change. It stepped aside. Asterisk, on that foggy morning in Italian mud, a piece of rusted wire said what no report ever could. Sometimes the right solution doesn't ask permission. It just works and dares the world to argue with the results.